Here's something to think about. Could our modern ideas about raising kids actually be working against our deepest human instincts?
It's a challenging thought, isn't it? We're looking today at Jean Liedloff's book, The Continuum Concept.
Right. It takes this really interesting approach, looking at us through our evolutionary history, our innate expectations.
And she contrasts that heavily with the Yequana people she lived with in South America.
It definitely got people talking. The Sunday Telegraph called it a thesis about achieving fulfillment.
And Dr. Francis Ilg, a pediatrician, found it most remarkable. Even the Frankfurter Allgemeine praised it as inspiring and informative.
Yeah, quite the range. And our invention today is also inspired by sources like Mindful Moments.
Oh, yeah. The YouTube channel, they do those AI book analyses.
Exactly. They really encourage you to think critically about these sorts of complex ideas.
Which is what we want to do today. Explore some of the positive theories from Liedloff about well-being, fulfillment, based on those Yequana observations.
We're definitely not telling anyone how to parent, but just exploring the ideas. So let's start with the in-arms phase. What exactly is that? Why did she think it was so crucial?
Well, based on the Yequana, the in-arms phase is basically from birth onwards, infants are almost constantly held.
Constantly.
Pretty much. Held, carried, just part of everyday life, whatever's going on. They're right there.
Okay.
Liedloff argued this constant physical connection isn't just, comforting. It actually builds this core sense of security, belonging.
Which she believed shapes you for life.
That's the idea. And it's pretty different from a lot of Western practices, isn't it? Where babies are often separate in cribs, playpens, that sort of thing.
Yeah, very different. Liedloff mentioned some Western parents who tried applying these ideas, right? Like Millicent?
Yes, Millicent's story is quite striking. She decided to keep her baby, Seth, in really close physical contact.
How did she manage that?
Used a sling a lot, apparently, while doing chores, even shared baths. And the result? She said Seth was incredibly relaxed, very quiet and content. And her friends, using more typical methods, they described their babies as being really tense, fussy. Millicent called them pokers, like they were tightly wound.
Wow, pokers. That's a vivid description. Seth was just different.
Seemed to be. Much more like the peaceful Yequana babies Liedloff described.
It wasn't just about having a good baby for Millicent, though, was it? The book suggests deeper impacts.
Absolutely. Think about Anthea's experience. Her older son, Trevor.
Right. He had some issues.
She described it as antisocial behavior, yeah? This was after, a more standard upbringing early on.
Okay.
But when her second child, a daughter, was born, Anthea went full continuum principles. Constant contact, co-sleeping with both kids.
With Trevor, too.
Yes. And remarkably, Trevor's behavior apparently changed dramatically. The aggression he showed at school just stopped.
That's incredible. So the idea is maybe his earlier behavior wasn't him being bad.
Exactly. Liedloff suggests it might be more like a plea, a sign that earlier needs weren't met, a plea to be shown how to behave cooperatively, as the book puts it.
It really reframes things, doesn't it? Shifting focus from the child's problem to potentially unmet needs.
It does. And this ties into another point the book makes. Children needing to see adult life.
How so?
Liedloff emphasizes that kids benefit from being around adults going about their lives, seeing cooperation, seeing how things work, and crucially, experiencing consistent reactions.
Consistent reactions? Yeah. You mean like discipline?
Not necessarily punishment, more like unconditional acceptance of the child, but clear signals about which actions are okay and which aren't. She argues against inconsistency, permissiveness. Kids need reliable feedback,
Right, they need to understand the boundaries. What about kids who are always demanding attention? That's a common thing parents deal with.
Liedloff has a different take on that, too. She suggests it's not attention for attention's sake.
No. Then what?
It's more of a signal that their experience feels wrong, that something isn't right, and needs correcting by the caregiver.
Ah, okay.
And if those early bids for, let's say, appropriate connection or correction are repeatedly missed or frustrated, it can apparently set up this lifelong pattern, an impulse to seek attention constantly, stemming from those unmet needs way back in infancy.
That's a really powerful idea. And these insights seem very connected to her own time in the Amazon.
Oh, completely. She talks about living with the Toropan Indians and just being struck by this profound sense of rightness.
Rightness?
Yeah, about their way of life, how happy the people seemed, how content, and their children. They were apparently incredibly well-behaved, cooperative, but never punished.
Never punished.
That's what she observed. It really made her question everything she thought she knew from her Western background.
And it wasn't just about the kids, was it? It was their whole approach to life, even work.
Exactly. The Yequana didn't seem to separate work from life in the way we often do.
Like fetching water, for example.
Right. That wasn't some chore to be rushed through efficiently. It was a social activity, done together, without resentment. It was just part of the flow of life.
No anxiety about time management or being productive.
Apparently not in the same way. It fits her larger point about living more in tune with our natural inclinations rather than creating these artificial pressures and separations.
Which all leads to the continuum concept itself. Can you break that down? What's the core idea?
At its heart, the continuum concept is the idea that we, as a species, evolve with specific needs and expectations based on our ancestral environment.
Okay, evolved expectations.
Yeah. And when our actual experiences, especially from infancy, match up with these evolved expectations, well, that's when we thrive. That's the continuum.
So it's about alignment.
Precisely. Alignment between our innate biological and psychological needs and the environment we experience. For a baby, this means that constant contact, the feeling of being secure and part of things, it creates this fundamental sense of rightness or essential goodness, as she puts it.
And that feeling is the foundation.
She argues it's the foundation for lifelong confidence, social ease, general well-being. Getting that right early on is critical.
It's interesting, too, that she says it doesn't strictly have to be the mother providing this constant care.
No, absolutely. The key is the consistent, responsive nurturing. It could be fathers, grandparents, other community members.
Yeah.
She even mentions how seeing one animal species care for another's young touches us.
Why is that?
She suggests it taps into our own deep-seated continuum sense of good practice. We intuitively recognize good nurturing when we see it, regardless of who's doing it. It resonates.
That makes sense. She also talks about those high appeal cues in things like Disney films.
Right, like baby animals with the big heads, big eyes, maybe slightly clumsy movements.
Yeah.
She points out that human babies naturally have these features. They're designed, essentially, to trigger our nurturing instincts, to make us want to care for them.
It's built in.
Seems like it. Which makes some common practices in so-called advanced countries seem even more jarring in contrast.
Like what specifically?
Well, things like letting babies cry it out, enforcing rigid feeding schedules, focusing on making the baby conform rather than meeting their immediate needs.
Yeah.
Liedloff warns this can unintentionally frame the baby as, like, an adversary, an enemy to be vanquished, she says quite starkly.
That's strong language. But you can see how that dynamic could emerge if you're constantly battling against what the baby seems to need.
And these early experiences, they're not trivial. They shape the infant's entire understanding of the world, their place in it, their fundamental sense of self-worth.
It really underscores the importance of understanding these deep-seated human needs. You know, it reminds me of the kind of explorations that channels like Mindful Moments and our podcasts often delve into, trying to get at these core aspects of human behavior.
Absolutely. It's about that deeper understanding.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, what about self-reliance? The Yequana approach sounds, well, very different again.
It really is. Liedloff describes Yequana children having incredible freedom.
Freedom how?
Freedom to explore their environment, even parts we'd consider dangerous near fires, using sharp tools, rivers, with surprisingly little direct supervision.
Seriously? That sounds risky to us.
To us, yes. But Liedloff saw it not as neglect, but as a profound trust in the child's innate capabilities, their natural sense of self-preservation.
An expectation that they are capable.
Exactly. Which contrasts sharply with our tendency to, perhaps, overprotect and underestimate kids' abilities.
And this extends to how they learn, too.
It seems so. Learning and participating in the culture wasn't forced. It was voluntary, driven by the child's own curiosity and desire to join in.
So adults didn't actively teach in the same way.
They'd help if asked or if help was genuinely needed, but the initiative largely came from the child. It fostered incredible self-reliance and competence from a young age.
Okay, so let's try and pull some of these threads together. What are the key positive takeaways here?
I think first there's the huge emphasis on that early in-arms phase, the continuous physical contact, creating that foundational sense of rightness and security.
Right, the starting point.
Then there's the reframing of challenging behaviors in children. Not necessarily defiance, but maybe, just maybe, a signal of unmet needs for connection, for guidance, for that continuum experience.
Seeing the behavior as communication.
Yes. And finally, the idea of innate competence. that children, like the Yequana kids, have a natural capacity for self-reliance and self-preservation if we trust them and provide the right environment of expectation.
It really all points back to this core message, doesn't it? That maybe aligning our practices with our species evolved, innate expectations could lead to, well, greater well-being, more fulfillment, like she saw with the Yequana.
That's certainly the argument she makes,
Yeah.
living more in line with our nature.
It definitely leaves you thinking. And maybe this is the question for you, listening. How do these ideas sit with your assumptions about raising children, about human nature itself? Could even small shifts in perspective, maybe in behavior, make a positive difference?
Lots to ponder there. If this conversation sparked something for you, we hope you'll subscribe for more discussions like this.
Yeah, and please share it with friends or family who might find it interesting.
If you want to go deeper, you might consider getting the Continuum Concept. We'll put a link where you can find it in related materials.
But most importantly, just keep thinking critically. Mull over these ideas, see how they resonate, and consider their implications for yourself.